It's an hour to the closing bell on Wall Street. An hour to do that final trade on a day where the Dow couldn't really decide which direction to go. It's heading lower, but only just. Pull apart the Dow. You look at Boeing, which went from bottom to top, and Apple, which is down quite sharply. These are the markets, and these are the drivers of the day. Trade talks with China are back on the agenda. Its stock's got a short-lived boost, but Boeing is a beneficiary. Apple's unveiling has left the markets cold. Tech has been down, and a major IPO at the New York Stock Exchange. Fancy cars outside. You'll hear from NIO's chief financial officer about taking on Tesla. Live from the world's financial capital, New York City, on a rainy, miserable sort of day. It is Wednesday. It's September the 12th. I'm Richard Quest. I mean business. Good evening. Tonight, Apple's biggest event for its biggest moneymakers. A new Apple Watch with new health features like the ability to take EKGs, cardiograms. Apple's announcement pushed shares of Fitbit lower. Just shows the power of the company. There are also going to be new high-end iPhones, the iPhone XS and the iPhone XS Max, with Apple's biggest phone screen. Now, according to what they say, both are faster, will last longer, and have up to 512 gigabytes of storage. And then you have the more reasonably priced XR, like the XS, a lot of 10s here. It's dropped the home button, and it starts at a mere $749. But some might arguably say, Brian Stelter in the Cupertino, that what we have here, it's a little bit of this and a little bit of that, but what that shouldn't detract from the fact that these were the incremental improvements necessary to the iPhone range.
That's right. Nothing revolutionary today, but lots of evolutionary announcements, Richard. Lots of improvements from the camera to the processor to augmented reality applications. And you mentioned those interesting new health features on the Watch app. Let's talk about that in a moment. But first, the iPhones, as you said, 3 new phones. Now, once again, Apple is pushing the limits for how much people are willing to pay for a phone. $1,100 for that top-of-the-line, biggest screen size ever for an iPhone. I think it's going to be interesting to see how that performs in the marketplace compared to the slightly lower-end models. I think the reality is that people have become so addicted to these devices, they would be willing to give up anything else in their budgets to be able to buy a new version of the iPhone. And so Apple's pushing, they're testing that proposition with a $1,100 model.
And those devices, the iPhone, the Watch, the Apple Watch, and its new various fitness features. We're seeing Fitbit down because once Apple moves in, one questions what happens next.
Yes, 2 really interesting developments with the watches. One, if you fall down, if you slip and fall out of the tub, if you fall down off a ladder and you're not moving, or the Apple Watch will sense there's a problem, it'll actually automatically dial 911 in some cases. That's a really interesting development for senior citizens, and frankly, people of all ages are going to appreciate. The other feature, really interesting, heart rate monitoring. They're going to be doing electrocardiograms within the watch, and then it'll send that data to your doctor. The Apple Watch will be able to tell if you have atrial fibrillation. In a world where these devices stress us out, Richard, the least they can do is keep our hearts healthy, and that's what we're seeing Apple try to do.
All right, so the mood, the feeling, the way it was all presented, what did you come away from this? Because it's as much a confidence building, it's as much an effort, the whole event, to sort of show front foot, back foot, middle foot.
Yes, and this is my first time at one of these, so I'm seeing the cult of Apple in action. I think what these events are about nowadays, Richard, is saying to the public, don't take these features for granted. This is incredible technology in your hand and on your wrists, technology that we couldn't have dreamed about a decade ago. It is true. The cameras are getting better. The technology is getting a lot faster. And features like facial recognition, which seemed kind of weird even just a year ago, are now accepted and embraced. So I think what Apple's trying to do every time this year, at this time of year every year, is to remind us how impressive this is.
Brian, how long have you had your phone? I don't mind whether it's iOS Android, whatever it might. How long have you had your existing phone?
I bought the iPhone X this time last year. My wife doesn't like it since it's too small, so I'm sure she'll want the new, bigger version of the iPhone XS Max. And honestly, Richard, I would give up pretty much everything. I would skimp on my meals. I would skip on taxis so that I can pay for the new phone. I'm addicted.
Brian Stelter, thank you. Apple's new iPhone XR. Although I have to say, I like the way Brian calls it the iPhone X. I've been calling it that as well, but everybody keeps telling me I'm wrong. It starts at just under $750. Setting that price was Apple's choice. Investors are worried iPhone prices could increase due to factors outside of Apple's control. For example, you've got introducing the tariff, which is designed by the Trump administration in Washington. Apple warns its features are just for the US market, with lower economic growth and a hit to profits and higher prices as well. The tariff integrates all of these accessories. Apple's profits on these would be cut between 10 and 20%. Apple didn't mention the iPhone. Sources told the New York Times that the Trump administration has promised to exclude it, while Donald Trump calls on Apple to make more of its products in the United States. There is one more thing. Apple has committed to investing $350 billion in the United States over the next 5 years. Now, we need to put all of this into some form of perspective. Good to see you.
Hello, Richard. How are you?
Good to see you. And Rana.
Hey, Richard.
We're going to put it into the boardroom of discussion. All right. You're doing the politics and the big picture.
Yes.
Shelley, you're doing the technology and exactly what we heard today. So from what we heard today, what did you make of it?
Well, it was very expected. This is the worst kept secret ever for these guys. No surprises at all. The iPhone XS Max, the big phone with a 6.5-inch display, is amazing. It's the best iPhone they've ever made, blah, blah, blah. Except it's not blah, blah, blah. These guys have put an incredible amount of technology behind this phone. They've also done a lot aesthetically. It's surgical steel. It's coming in some plated finishes. Everything about this phone screams awesome. The augmented reality capabilities are exceptional in iOS 12, and the new chip that they put in this phone, the new A-series chip, what they're calling the A12 Bionic chip, is just a marvel of modern science. So this thing is powerful, and it will be an awesome device.
But on the pricing of it?
I think the pricing is what you expected. It's $999 for the $749 for the cheesy one, $999 for the small one, and $1099 for the big one starting. But they all usually go up around $100 each for the amount of storage that you have.
Rana,
Yeah, so I'm most fascinated by the way in which they're going into health and health apps, using FDA approval to collect data. I mean, this is going to be a way that Apple can actually keep margins up because, as you pointed out, they're going to come under pressure with this potential next round of tariffs. This is where the rubber is really going to hit the road for tech because there's so much of a broader range of things that are going to be falling under these tariffs. It's going to raise prices for U.S. consumers. They're going to need to add value in order to keep margins up.
Okay, but on this question of tariffs and the ability of Apple. Now, they've already warned what's going to happen. They've already warned that it will hit their numbers. They've already asked the administration not to do this. But Apple is only a symptom, or Apple is merely large, but merely one of this deteriorating situation on the trade front, but for tech.
For sure, and I actually think we're headed to sort of a tripolar world on tech. I mean, I really do think that the Chinese have made it very clear they want to go their own direction. They've got their Xiaomi, they've got their own consumer brands that they would like to see competing against Apple, and in fact, Xiaomi has taken market share, a lot of market share from Apple in China.
So what's going to happen, Richard, is that business war is going to sort itself out, because you're talking about a company that's got the best supply chain of any company in the world. Tim Cook has built a supply chain to build iPhones and iDevices that is unlike any, and he can actually control the market in a way that a lot of people can't. So the tariffs are going to be one thing. If you want to talk tariffs, get some guys from Apple on here to tell you about how they're sourcing, because the sourcing at Apple is a wonder of the world. One thing I didn't mention, it's really important. Tim Cook got up there and talked privacy, and he shot a huge digger at everybody in the whole world by saying, at Apple, your data belongs to you. We believe it. That's what we do. And it got a round of applause.
I believe him more than I believe any other FANG. Let me put it that way. You know, I think the fact that they are making this a competitive advantage is very, very interesting. Apple and IBM are actually out in the lead on making privacy a business advantage.
All right, let's move from Apple to Snap. I'm sorry, did I say something amusing?
No, you did actually. Yeah, you did actually.
Snap dropped the best part of 10% today because one broker downgraded. Well, there you see it. It was off 9. The price is 9. It's down 7% and off. It's trading now at 9.17.
Are you on Facebook, Richard? I mean, real Facebook. You use Facebook stories. The problem that Snap has is that it's a business model, not a business. And, you know, all Facebook needs to do is breathe in and out and kill them. And the redesign of Snap was so incredibly bad that people who loved it stopped loving it. So they did two things. They got people out of love with their product, which actually was hard to do because they had a good product.
You know, there's a bigger market story here, too, which is that we've already seen a little bit of a shakeout in tech stocks. You're going to see more of that. I think that this is the beginning of separating out the real winners from the losers.
Right, so on markets now, one of our guys suggested that, you know, if you look at the FANG, the FANGs could become the ANG, because although Facebook is very powerful, Facebook has fundamental problems of it.
Well, it's a regulatory issue. I mean, a lot of these companies, Facebook and Google, I would argue in particular, are really predicated on, are they going to be able to allow to run their businesses the way they have been? Are they going to be able to use data in the ways that they have been? I think that there's real regulatory pressures in Europe and the U.S. that may challenge that model.
In practice, Richard, if you think about regulation, the way it may play out is that the legislator they'll legislate some kind of privacy regulations in the United States, but that'll be a level playing field. Who's it going to hurt more? Who's it going to hurt less? And that's an interesting question because these models for Facebook, Google, even inside of Google, YouTube and Google Search, they're all different models.
Finally, how long have you had your phone? I suppose it's not really fair for you because you sort of change, like you change your socks.
I'm stunned I was going to mention that. That was a BlackBerry until magically now it's an iPhone. When did that happen?
I've always had an iPhone for a long time, but I've used a BlackBerry as well. And I would go back to a BlackBerry if they made one that was...
I love the BlackBerry. I'm so glad you admitted it. I want to come clean.
No, he always admits it, and I was getting grief about
so
it.
How long have you had your phone for?
Well, this is a 1-year-old, and the new one will come in whenever the new ones come in.
A couple years.
Good to see you, man. Thank you.
Great to see you, Richard.
Choppy day on Wall Street. Mid-morning, there was a boost after the Wall Street Journal reported that the US was proposing fresh China trade talks. Now, the gains for the market evaporated. We're down 28 as we head towards the close. Boeing, of course, has held on to those gains as being up nearly 2.5% and amongst the leaders on the Dow. I spoke to Ray Dalio, the founder of the world's largest hedge fund, Bridgewater Associates, and Ray told me the dangers are very real. A trade war can escalate into something much worse.
Economic wars lead to other kinds of wars. I mean, if you look at the history of Japan and the United States in the 1931 period, 1931, we have tariffs, and then we also have populism in Japan, and you have a competition for economic resources in Asia. This is somewhat similar to Japan, China, and the United States. And so those tensions and how they create embargoes and economic sanctions, that economic warfare is something that not only undermines the effectiveness of the economies, but it also creates those kinds of tensions so that when you have the next downturn, that's the risky time, right? Imagine now, we have populations that are our populations that are at odds with each other, politically and also economically. Now, imagine what the next downturn is going to be like in terms of our own effectiveness and how we'll be to each other. That type of conflict also exists between countries, and I think that that's a dangerous set of circumstances.
Ray Dalio talking to me. Jamie Dimon has had to clarify that he's not running for president after claiming he could beat Donald Trump in an election. The JP Morgan boss said he was smarter than Mr. Trump, and then he said this wealthy New Yorker actually earned his money. It wasn't a gift from Daddy. Quickly walking back those comments, Christina Alessi joins me now. What did he now say? Because the post statement was what?
He said this is why he shouldn't be a politician, that he shouldn't have said those things publicly. But what's shocking about this is that he was literally sounding like he was picking a fight with Donald Trump. I mean, saying that he's smarter than Trump, taunting Trump for starting out with money from his father. I mean, these are all hot button things to say to the president, right? And we know this president likes to attack. Look, I've covered Jamie for years. I've interviewed him. I know him really well. I could totally see him saying this off the record, right? Or to any reporter on the side of a conference, totally off the record. But to say it out loud, whole other level, especially because I know that Jamie has regretted some of the public criticisms that he's lobbed against investors, regulators, other politicians, and he's learned from those mistakes, and he's actually been a lot more reserved in his public comments lately.
He said he's committed to staying as the head for at least 5 years, so which would take him out of 2020 consideration. But the question's not going to go away. So is it generally felt that he would like to if he could?
You always get to the core of the issue. I think he's thought about it, and I've been told that he's thought about it theoretically. Do I think that Jamie Dimon's actually going to run? No, I don't think he's going to run. I think a Wall Street banker in this environment where the Democratic Party has a very strong base undercurrent that is rejecting the 1%, that is rejecting New York and Wall Street, I think it would be very hard for Jamie to overcome that, and he said as much.
He said exactly. Great to have you. Thank you.
Thank you.
At the earlier time, thank you.
Thank you.
When we come back,